Hello everybody, how are you doing? Welcome back to xplane SDK 3 tutorial. This is episode 3 of this tutorial and we are going to interact more with Daterefs. We are going to create a new project inside Visual Studio and we are going to get the already available Daterefs inside the xplane, manipulate it and publish it as a new Dateref. If you haven't watched the last two episodes, I truly recommend you to go back and watch those episodes. Let's have a quick review of what we have done in the last two episodes. In the first episode, we just talked about the definition of SDK and what ability that it gives to you, and we talk about this software development kit, and we talk about how to configure Visual Studio 2017 for xplane development. We configured the Visual Studio for xplane developers, and we did everything needed to build our first plugin, which is Hello World program. Then we publish it inside the xplane and see the results. In the second episode, we talk about Daterefs and what are actually they doing, and we talk about Dateref editor. We monitored some Daterefs, and I told you about the documentation of the xplane and the directory of all of the Daterefs you can access, and I gave you some ideas about what you can do after learning the basics of SDK and the Dateref definition. In this episode, we are going to use that idea and we are going to use the Dateref concepts to create a new Dateref. As I told you, one of the ideas is to create a realistic sensors, for example, or new sensors, some sensors that are not available inside the xplane. It depends on your purpose. For this episode, I make it simple and just get the value of the ambient temperature sensor in each loop. We can do some manipulate on that. We can add time lag to our temperature sensor, which is very realistic. But in this episode, we only add a random noise to that. For example, if we get the temperature of 15 inside xplane, our Daterefs will be something around 15.5 or 14.5. It's just a random noise around 50. Just a concept you need to understand from this. Then we are going to register our Dateref inside Dateref editor. What you need is that you see thousands of Daterefs inside Dateref editor, but they are not all of the Daterefs. They are those Daterefs that are registered inside Dateref editor. So there may be many more Daterefs inside xplane, but are not registered in Dateref editor, are not being showed in that page. Because we want to monitor our Dateref inside Dateref editor, so we need to register it inside Dateref editor. Okay, let's dive to code and talk about the steps we need for that. But before that, let me show you this page. I truly recommend you, if you are going to develop a more advanced plugin for xplane, go through the xplane documentation. Just Google the xplane SDK documentation and you'll find this page. You will find all the APIs for xplane, all the classes, objects, definitions, and so on. And you will find many examples here. So if you have the basic knowledge of xplane SDK and how to react with them, and also have a basic knowledge of object-oriented programming and C++ programming, you will have no problem finding what you want inside this documentation. For example, the names are very obvious. For example, for camera control, you use the XPLM camera API. And inside this API, there are lots of classes, objects, functions, and lots of definitions here, and also examples. You can find everything you want here. But in this episode, I'm going to just give you some knowledge, some basic knowledge on how to use the SDK and Dateref management. After that, you can go on and use this documentation for your own purposes. This is the project I'm using for this. I'm created for this tutorial. I already uploaded it and put the link in the description so you can use it. It's very simple. You can just open it, and if you have configured your Visual Studio in the last episodes, you can easily just build the project and that's done. When you download the file, you will find this folder custom Dateref example, and this is the files you are going to get when you extract the files. Just open the solution or open it from Visual Studio and you will find this project here. I'm going to go through each line, not each line, just the concepts. I'm going to give you what is happening inside this code to give you some idea about what is happening. Okay, the first line is just defining the compatibility of our plugin with the SDK version. This line means if a computer doesn't have xplane SDK version 3, our plugin won't be installed and will give him some errors. We can use some older version compatibility such as xplane2. But because we are not using any special APIs that are not available in older version, we can use either version 2, 3, and so on. Then you see that we included the APIs here, the .h file of those libraries and APIs. Don't mess with that right now. We just include them. There will be no trouble. If you're going to use some new APIs, you may need to include them as well. As I told you, just be friendly with the documentation. Everything you need is inside this documentation. This documentation shows you what API you should include and what you don't need. The next one is a command that we are sending to the Dateref editor plugin. It doesn't have anything to do with your plugin. This is a predefined code that when you use this code, this binary code to the Dateref editor plugin when you want to register a new plugin. Don't import it, just put it inside your code. Then I defined a temperature noise amplitude, which is 2%. I define it for our purpose. This is the amplitude of the noise I'm going to add to the temperature. 2%, it means if the temperature is 100, the temperature deviation will be less than 2 degrees of Celsius. Let's make it a little more, for example, 5%, so we can see the results better after we publish everything. The real game is starting here. xplane Dateref is a you can say it an object, a definition, that if either if you are using available Dateref inside xplane or you are using your own Dateref, you need to create xplane Dateref object. This is you can think of it as a handle, as a label, or as a handle to your Dateref. You just you get the value, you set the value, everything you do with that Dateref you are using through this xplane Dateref. It's somehow the key to access that Dateref. It is not correct, but you can think of it as a pointer. It is not it's not correct concept. But remember how you access the variable through the pointer? This is something like that, but not exactly. Then you create, you see we have ideal temperature reference. I call it reference at the end of ideal temp reference, which is the temperature ambient, which is already available in the xplane. And we have sensor temp reference, which is our new plugin, our new Dateref, which are going to create in this code. Then I create the two variables for the values of these two. These two are the reference to the Dateref, and these two are the values for those Daterefs. Ideal temperature for this, sensor temperature for this. Then we are going to create our callbacks. If you are familiar with programming, we already know what is callback. Callback, you can think of it as we create some code and xplane is running by itself. It's processing the aerodynamic, propulsion, and controls. And you know that xplane is doing that very fast, maybe 10 times per second or a few times in 10 times per frame, depends on your configuration. So xplane needs to know in what period your code should be run. Does your code should run in every flight loop calculation, or it needs to run 1 second, or it needs to run only once? So this is the callback function. You define this callback function that explains. You tell to the xplane that, hey, xplane, run this function for me at specific times. Okay, this is the name. You can tell every name, each name you want. So then we define in xplane that in what periods we want this function to be run. After that, we get to the concept of getter and setters, data accessors. If you have already programmed the object-oriented programming, you know that many of the variables and attributes inside the classes are private, or we don't tend to access them outside from outside the class only by the value. So we use getter and setter methods. If you don't know them, if you don't know this concept, I truly recommend you to go just have a quick review of object-oriented programming. Getter and setters are very simple concepts. In real life, you have interaction with it every day. When you go to the bank, you don't have access to your money. That is your money inside the bank, but you don't have access to it directly. You ask the bank accountant to go bring you the money or go put your money inside your account. This is the same concept for getter and setters. And in xplane, for every new Daterefs that we are creating, we need to define a getter and setter. You see, I declared the function name getSensorVal and setSensorVal. By the concept, you know the getter doesn't have any input, but returns something, which is float here. And setter doesn't return anything, but input this float out value. Don't mess with this one. You don't need to know anything about this yet. Then the function float randomizer. This is not related to xplane at all. This is the function that I have created to create some random numbers. No big deal. From here, you start defining your plugin to xplane. You introduce your plugin. Hey, xplane, this is my plugin. This is its name, out name. This is our signature. It defines who has created this plugin, and you give a signature to that. And this is our description. You are introducing your plugin to xplane or any user that's using xplane. This is the real game. This is the real part of this code. We are creating a new Dateref. This is what we are looking for. You remember the handle that or reference we created for our Dateref sensor template. You see, we use this handle for registering the data accessor, for registering our Dateref. You see, we use this handle, then we use this xplm register data accessor. You can find all the example and definition and the syntax inside the documentation as well. You give it a name. I give it real sensor temp underscore C. You can give it any other name you want, but be careful not to replace any already available data. The next field is the type of the Dateref. You can xplm type float. I'm using float. You can use integer, boolean, float array, and so on. Very simple. You can just change it with anything you like. The next parameter is defining that if this Dateref is writable or not. Remember in the last episode we talked about the writable and read-only Dateref. Some Daterefs are not writable, which is very reasonable, and some of them are writable. I put this one as writable because it's no big deal. But the temperature sensor inside xplane is not writable. You cannot just change the temperature at a specific point and just change the temperature of the environment because it's being calculated by the weather engine. You can't change the weather of a single point. And all these lines here is defining the data accessors. Remember the getters and setters. For each data type, integer, float, double, int array, and so on, you can define a different data accessor. Because we are not using any integer, doubles, and so on, we only define the data accessor for float. And this should be the same name that you declare for your functions. Get sensor var and set sensor var. And that's done. Right now you have created a new Dateref inside xplane. Now you have to initialize it, get access to it, and update it. The next step is it is optional. It is an optional step, but we are going to use it to just better understanding of the code. We find and initialize our Daterefs. We want to make sure that our Dateref is created. Again, we are using this reference. I told you this is the most useful reference for Dateref editor, most useful variable. It's a key to the Dateref. If you have this key, you can access the Dateref. If you don't, you can't. You say sensor temp reference equal to xplane find Dateref and using the name. Imagine, okay, no problem. This is the name of our Dateref. Remember, this function goes to the xplane settings, find this Dateref, and get the key, get the reference, and put it inside this variable. As I told you, this line is optional because it's already happened here, but we are doing for the sake of tutorial. Okay, the next one, pretty similar, but a different. But there is a difference. This is not the data that we created. This is already available inside xplane, which is sim, weather, temperature, ambient. So, but you see the same procedure. You tell the function, go find this data for me, get the key for that, and put the key inside the ideal temp reference. Very simple. Okay. Then we want to use the xplane get data if. I tell you what it is. xplane get data, its name is very obvious. It's go get the data of a specific data. And again, we are using that key, the reference, to access that Dateref. What is this f? This f means the Daterefs. If it was an integer, it was get data I. If it was a boolean, get data b. But because our Dateref is float, we are using get data f. So what is happening here? We had the float value for ideal temperature, which is the temperature that is available inside xplane. We go get the get the value of the current temperature and put it inside this variable. No big deal. Then we are going to set data using set data. Exactly the same concept with get data and set data. But the problem is, the difference is with getter, we are going to get something, but with setter, we are not getting anything. As you see here, our new Dateref doesn't have a value yet. I mean, this one, sensor temp reference, doesn't have a value. So just for initializing, we are going to put the current weather, current temperature, current ideal temperature inside our new Dateref, just for initializing. Okay, xplane set data float. We put, then we give the key to the Dateref, and then we give the value. So it means that it put the ideal temperature value inside our new Dateref. No big deal. Then registering the callback. Remember what I told you about the callback? We just declared the function for callback, but right now we are going to tell the xplane that this is my callback. You are using this xplane register flight loop callback. There are different callbacks inside xplane. You can go through documentation and know that some callbacks are attached to the flight loop. Flight loop means each iteration, each calculation that xplane is doing inside this calculation, aerodynamic and so on. There are also other callbacks such as graphic callbacks that happens after each graphic update. It happens after every change is happening inside the graphics of xplane and so on. We are using flight loop callback here. The syntax is clear. You give the name of your callback function. This is the name we give here. We just declare it here. And then the first one is the timeout function. The timeout that it means. Let me say it clear. This is a time if you put very small value. xplane doesn't run your code after each flight loop exactly. It asks you that how long time should pass before I call you again. For example, if you put 1, it means that, okay, xplane, you are doing your code, for example, 100 hertz, so you can run me every 1.01 seconds. But I don't want to be called that fast. I want to call about 1 second. So xplane after each loop callback will stop. It won't stop the processing, but it will stop running your code for 1 second. After 1 second, again xplane calls your code. And this is the definition. And the next one, put to null and go on. The next one is registering the Dateref inside the Dateref editor. Remember I told you creating the Dateref is not enough. The Dateref is available inside the xplane and the code is doing its job, but you can't see the result inside Dateref editor. So if you want to see the data in Dateref editor, there are several methods for that. The best method you can find that in documentation. Just search for registering Dateref to Dateref editor. But the method we are using here is this one. Just this is the exact code I copied from the documentation. It's very simple. It says it goes through the setting of the Dateref editor examples and plugin and send message to the plugin. Remember I told you there is a predefined code for adding a Dateref inside the Dateref editor. We are using it here. We tell to the plugin, we tell to the Dateref editor, hey, add this Dateref. Adding means this command. Add this Dateref to your monitoring list. After this line, from now on when you go to the Dateref editor, you see your Daterefs inside that. The next one are just some events, for example. You can call it some event handler, but they are not event handlers, it's something like event handler. It means whenever our plugin stops, what should happen? We unregister our temperature reference, it means we throw out our key because we don't need that anymore, and unregister our flight loop callback. So xplane doesn't need to process our code again. So you must unregister your flight loop callback. For disabling the plugin or enabling, you can do some other code. For example, you can give a notification to the user that, hey, you enabled my plugin, hey, you disabled my plugin, and so on. Okay, we don't need to talk about this. And here, this is the function, this is our data accessors declaration. We declare the function at the top of the code. This is function definition. If you know very basic of C++, you know what's happening here. And after that, you come here, and this is the full declaration of your function. You see, very simple. For the getter, we input nothing, void nothing, but we return the value of the Dateref, which is sensor temp. Remember, we add these two values to access the real value inside the Dateref. So for the getter, we return sensor temperature. And for the setter, very simple, we get a value from whoever is using this function, and we put that value inside sensor temperature. You can go and do some error checking. For example, first check if this value is reasonable, then add it to the real value. But we are not going to do that. Okay, this is the real code that is happening. Before that, let me tell you what is randomizer. Randomizer, I told you this is just a simple code that I just copied and pasted from Stack Overflow. It just gives you a random number between two floats. No big deal. Okay, this is the exact code that is happening inside each callback. and you see, very simple code. We almost have done nothing. First, we define two variables, float, ideal, temperature, value. I only declared this variable for the sake of tutorial. You don't need to create new variable for that. I created that so it will be clear what I'm doing. You don't need to create all these variables. We use xplane get data float, ideal temp reference. It means the real temperature that is available inside xplane, and we put it inside this variable. Then I created a temporary temperature, very silly name, because I just wanted to put this value inside a variable for the sake of tutorial, then add it to the our data. Float temporary temperature, and this is the new temperature we have. You see we have ideal temperature val plus randomizer minus temp noise amplitude multiplied by ideal temperature, and okay, it's very simple. If you are an engineer students, you know what's happening here. You get the value, get the temperature from the xplane. For example, it is 15, and what is happening, it is adding a minus constant and positive constant, which is this constant multiplied by the current temperature. It just gives you an error. For example, I told you with the 5% that we are using, if the temperature is 100 Celsius, the value you are getting will be between 105 and minus 90, between 105 and 95, plus 5 degrees and minus 5 degrees. You can do everything you want. For example, you can delete all this and put a 0. And your Dateref will show 0 all the time, or any data you want. And the last step, xplane set data float, sensor temp reference. Again, the key, we are going to set the data to our Dateref. We use the key to access the Dateref, and we put the value float empty. And the last thing we talk is this one, return this return value. This is the same as the value here, 1. This is again the timeout function, the time that xplane will ignore the callback. This is the better way of telling that. For this can be a negative value, 0 and 1. If you put it 0, your code will be run only once. After this callback finished, it won't run again. Done. If you put it, for example, 1, what will happen? xplane is running its process at, for example, 10 hertz. For example, 10 hertz. So every 0.1 second, xplane is doing its loop. So every 0.1 second, it is ready to run our callback. But because we put 1 here, it won't run our code after each process. When our code finish running, xplane set a timer, okay? It's doing all its jobs and just like normal. After 1 second says, okay, I'm ready for your code again. After the next callback, I will call your code. So you can put bigger values for the very longer periods between the run, or you can use some, for example, 1,000th of a second. It depends on the xplane, your configuration of xplane processing, and also your computer capability as well. Because your code is very small code, but xplane is doing very big calculation in each flight loop. So it won't bother other codes, only for your code. So the priority with is xplane at the first. Okay, that's it. It's all you need to do about how to create your Dateref. Just like the first tutorial, I'm going to build this solution. Hopefully there won't be any errors because we didn't mess up with anything. It's creating some warnings. And yes, build succeeded, 0 fails. Remember what we did for this episode in the last episodes for publishing our plugin to xplane. A new folder called release is here. We come here, we go to plugins, custom Dateref example 64, and this is our plugin. You need to copy this one and go to your xplane root. For me is here, where your xplane is installed. Remember, I told you there are different plugins, different methods for using plugins. Some plugins are attached to xplane itself, some plugins are attached to a specific aircraft, some plugins are attached to a specific scenery. We are going to attach the xplane to a specific aircraft, for example. I go to aircraft, laminar research, and last time we used Cessna. This one we're going to use Baron B58. There is a folder called plugin. If your own aircraft didn't have this folder, you created your own. You create a folder called plugins. Inside this, paste your plugin. That's from Dateref example. Now the show begins and we go to our xplane to just have a relief. After all this coding, we are going to see the result, hopefully. Okay, we create a new flight. Let's be inside. I haven't installed the scenery, but doesn't matter. Let's be inside our country, Iran. I'm going to select Beechcraft Baron 58 and start flight. For the sake of this tutorial, I haven't used any scenery because I wanted it to be clean xplane version, no other plugins, no other scenery, and be fast. Okay. Just for your information, Mehrabad Airport is inside Tehran, Iran, and it is located inside Tehran, the capital of Iran, and it's very old airport. It's been in Tehran for, I don't know, 50 years and so, maybe more, 60 years. Okay, I don't know why it is taking so much long time, I don't know. Oh, not responding. No, everything's good. I don't know what is happening. If it takes, oh, okay, I wanted to pause the video. Okay, what is happening? We are already in the air. Okay, yes, we are not on the runway. Thank you, xplane. I'm going to put ourselves on the runway 29 left. Please work this time. Okay, hopefully we are on the runway. Okay, you already see that it is working. That's good. It's exactly what we wanted. First, let's see the real temperature of the environment inside xplane. You remember the Dateref name, ambient temperature ambient. You see it is 14.99, almost 15. And we now look for our new Dateref, which is 10. You see it? It's changing between, I don't know, 14.8 and 15.2 or something. Let's change the temperature and see the results again. Weather, I don't know, manual, temperature at nearest airports, put it 15, 51, very hot day, not like it. You see? Again, it's the random value is changing between 53 and 48, I think, 49. Just one more thing I want to visualize in this example, which is changing this value, because it took a long time for me to understand what is happening for this value. I want you to understand it correctly. Let me change it to 1 and see what is happening right now. We save, rebuild, let's clean the solution, build the solution, and I'm going to switch another aircraft. And wait for it. Okay, once succeeded, go to plugins, no, go to, okay, here, SDK project, release plugin, copy, and go back. You can delete it or replace it. Okay, I come back here and again load the beach-bound B58. Before seeing that, just imagine yourself and what you're expecting to see right now. We changed the period, timeout period from 1,000 of a second, I think, to 1 second. So what will happen? Xplane will wait 1 second after each code run, and after that it run the code again. So we expect to see the value changes every second, but in reality a little more than 1 second, because 1 second plus one loop after one loop of the explain process. So let's go to explain. You see, this is it. It's loading very and this is not a bug. It's your SDK is running all the time, even if the explain is paused. You can add the code inside the explain to stop your plugin when the simulator is paused. The point is, you see here, it's changing. Remember I told you the writable, for example, you can change it to a new variable, but what will happen after that? After 1 second, again it will change to the value that it wants. You see, after a second it will change again. Okay, that's it. I think it's everything I wanted to cover in this episode. Let me know if you have any question. I'm sorry if I'm not very fluent in tutorials. This is my first experience, actually the third experience in this series. This is my first experience. I hope you will be satisfied and I have helped you in this career. Let me know what you think. Give me some improvement ideas, complaints. If you have any questions, you can email me on the comment section below. And if you want to know about the other episodes that are coming, I don't know when I will create the next episode, but I try to be soon because I'm very busy with other stuff as well. If you want to get notified of a new video, just click on subscribe inside this and give me a motivation with likes and comments. In the next episode, I think I will use a new practical example. We will use the knowledge that we have until now, and we create something useful, something practical, something I'm using for my master's thesis right now. We are going through that. I haven't decided yet, but maybe it will be about the force feedback of the stick. We are going to calculate the force feedback by our own, not using xplane. Using some flight test data, and we inject it inside xplane to get the values as well. Okay, so stay with me for the next episode, and hope you enjoyed it. Happy flying. Thank you for watching.